Hello friends, welcome back to Belle's Library. I'm Heather, and today we are going to wrap up my February reading and talk about all these lovely books that I read this month. So we're gonna go ahead and run through a few stats, and then we'll kind of get into reviews of the last half of the month, all the books that I read. So in the month of February, I read 10 books, and that equated to 3,357 pages. For star rating, I had 3 5 stars, 4 4 stars, and 3 3 stars. No 2 stars or 1 stars. The format of the books that I read, I had 2 ebooks, 5 audiobooks, 1 physical book, and 2 where I mixed reading it and listened to the audiobook. Surprisingly, I actually ended up with a variety as far as my genre goes. This month was the first month that I did my TBR game, and I was getting quite a few sci-fi roles and fantasy, but I was able to kind of slide in a few other things, so that was awesome. So I read 2 contemporary, 2 mystery, 2 sci-fi, 2 fantasy, and 2 romance. In the age category, I actually had it split half and half between adult and YA, so 5 of each. So now we're going to get into a little bit of representation. So LGBTQ plus representation. 4 of the books didn't have any. 3 of the books it was present, and then 3 of the books it was the main character that represented this group. Also, 4 of the books that I read were from authors of color. And I also wanted to add in a couple things just because some of the goals that I'm working on. So how many bookshelves did I actually read from my bookshelf? And that was 4.5. And then did I finish any series? And I did. I finished the Renegade series, and I'm almost through another one as well. So like I briefly mentioned, I'm only going to be talking about the second half of the month because I did put out a mid-month wrap-up with the first 4 books that I read for the month in those first 2 weeks. So those 4 books are In Love and Pajamas by Katana Chetwynd, and I gave this one a 4 star. The Poet X by Elizabeth Acevedo, and I gave this one 5 stars. The Space Between Worlds by Micaiah Johnson, I gave this one 4 stars. And The Gifts of Spring by Shira Glassman, and I gave this one 3 stars. So if you wanted to check out more thoughts and learn a little bit more about those books, I will have my mid-month wrap-up up top there, and I will also throw it down below so you guys can take a look into more info on those. And then I've got 6 more books for the second half of the month that I'm going to share with you guys now. As you guys know, I just mentioned that this was the first month that I was doing my TBR game, Belle's Bookland. And so I actually rolled 7 different rolls, and so I had 7 books that I needed to read for the month, and I was pretty successful, surprisingly. In my first half of the month, out of those 4 books, only 2 were actually off of that TBR, so I still had 5 more books to get through at the end of the month, and I just was really slumping and just having a hard time reading, so I kind of kicked it into gear, and I just blew through a whole bunch of books at the end of the month here, so I actually did pretty good. I finished 6 out of the 7 books, and then the 7th book I am working on. So the last book I have to get through is A Sky Beyond the Storm. I am a couple hundred pages in, so I'm not taking a punishment because I have at least made it almost to halfway through the book. I've made it a good chunk in, and so I just need to finish it up here really soon and then get into my March TBR, which is another 8 books. So hopefully, being a slight bit behind with this one doesn't totally throw me off. So I will give more thoughts and everything once I've actually finished this. It'll probably be in my mid-month wrap-up for March. And this was the other series that I was saying I'm almost finished with, because this is the last book in the Ember and the Ashes quartet. Okay, so now let's go ahead and get into the other 6 books that I've read. And the first one that I finished in that second half of the month is Nevernight by Jay Kristoff. I listened to this one on audio because I remember watching somebody's video. They were talking about how they were intimidated by the footnotes and stuff in that book, and that is something that intimidated me. It was an interesting concept. I wanted to read this book, but like, I know some people have a hard time like switching down to the footnotes. And in the comments, somebody had said, listen to the audiobook because the narrator just kind of works it into the story. And I was like, that sounds awesome. So I decided to do that. And I enjoyed this book. I gave it a 4-star. If you guys haven't heard about this book, it is following Mia. And when she is a young girl, her dad fails at starting this rebellion and she barely escapes with her life to get away, and she learns that she has these kind of shadow powers and basically ends up starting to train to become an assassin to get revenge, and she gets herself into this like assassin school, and so you're kind of watching her go through the assassin school, and she's got to like win over all the other competitors in all these different kind of trials, and there's also another person murdering people. And so yeah, that's kind of the general synopsis of that one. And I definitely very much enjoyed it. Like I said, I gave it 4 stars. I really liked the school aspect of it. I enjoyed like that there was different kind of classes and they were all trying to compete and, you know, be able to make it through this. And there was some friendships she made, but you were kind of questioning them because everybody's there for their own motives in a lot of ways. And I think the only thing that kind of brought down the star was that sometimes I got a little bit lost in some of the writing, and then also I saw some of the plot twists coming. I didn't see all of them. There's definitely some surprises and some things that I was surprised by, but there was a couple things I was just like, yeah, I kind of saw that coming, you know? So that's the only thing that kind of made it not like super above and beyond for me, but I still super enjoyed it, and I really want to continue in the series and see where Mia is going to go from here. So next I picked up Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse. Now this one I was kind of flexing one of my sci-fi spots to fit this in there because it was tagged as sci-fi by some people on Goodreads, and I knew there was like an eclipse and some stuff that maybe could swing it that way, but it really was not a sci-fi at all. So, but I did read it, and I was really excited to read this book. I wanted to read it so bad. It was also a like buddy read on Jessie May's Discord shelf space, and so I was reading along with everybody in the Discord, and so that was really fun, and I really liked being able to do that and kind of being a part of that discussion, and it made me think more about the book and share some of my thoughts and stuff. So being so excited to go into this book, I thought I was really going to enjoy it, and I think that's part of why I'm feeling a little bit disappointed in this book. I only gave it 3 stars, which is not a bad rating. 3 stars is good. I did enjoy a good chunk of it. There's other parts that just really brought me down. Okay, so this story follows 4 different point of views. We have Narampa. She is the new sun priest, and she lives in the Celestial Tower, and she kind of is supposed to be the one that really oversees all of these different clans, and she's kind of the head of the tower and everything. She's way up there, but she doesn't come from the greatest background, and so she's still trying to earn the respect of the other colleagues in the tower as well as the other clans. And then we also have Serapio, and we see him when he's kind of a younger boy as well as now when he's like 20 or so, and he has some major trials and tribulations as far as his mom wants him to bring back the Crow God, and so that's kind of his plot line, and he's getting on a ship because he needs to make it to the Celestial Tower by the eclipse. So everything's kind of leading up to this eclipse. And then we have Zyala. She is a teak woman, which she can be kind of prejudiced against by certain people, but she's a very interesting character. She's got a lot of different interesting things going on with her, but I don't want to give too much away, but she's definitely kind of like a fun-loving, pirate captain kind of thing. She's the captain of the ship, and she's got to get Serapio across the sea, but she's, yeah, like, I think I enjoyed her the most. She was super fun, but she also was like, no, I'm the captain, everybody needs to stay in line, but she also like had a heart, but she didn't always want people to know that. I don't know, she was very interesting, and I really enjoyed her. And then we have Okoa. He didn't come in until a little bit later, but he is Carrion Crow's matron, her son. And so he also trained at like the war college that they have and such. So he's kind of trained in combat. And so those are the 4 people we're following. And my main issue here was that I just felt like I didn't see enough of why these characters were doing what they were doing. They each had their role to play and their plot line, but I didn't really feel like I knew why or what their motivations were or could really become invested in any of them. So I was just like, who am I actually rooting for here? Who's what is happening? Why are you even doing this? Why do you care? Like what? I don't know. I just wanted more of that depth, and I just didn't have that. I also just would have loved to have learned a little bit more about the clans and how they work, and just a little bit more world building in that way. Like, I don't know if maybe like it just needed more pages because it was from so many points of view. I don't know, because I really enjoyed the premise, and I like a lot of the things that the author was putting in here. I just felt like it just needed a little more depth and detail and just a little more to it. So that's kind of how I'm feeling about it now. I am curious as to how the sequel is going to go to this and see if maybe we're going to get a little bit more of that, and, you know, maybe being with the characters for more books will help kind of build some of that. So I do want to pick up the sequel, and yeah, that's kind of my thoughts so far on that one. Okay, so next up we'll talk about Supernova by Marissa Meyer. This is the 3rd installment in the Renegades trilogy, and so I'm really excited because I finally finished this. I think I started reading this in February of last year. So it's been like a full year of me getting through these 3 books, but I adored this. 5 stars for sure. I absolutely loved getting back with these characters. Oh my gosh, Nova and Adrian are just, they're so fun to read about. Like, Marissa Meyer's writing is just so easy for me that I can just sit back and enjoy and envelop myself in the story. I did listen to the other 2 books on audiobook, and then this one I listened sometimes on audiobook, but then I also physically read it, just depending on my mood. I was actually really enjoying that towards the end of the month. I can't like listen to it while I'm reading it at the same time. Like, that just drives me nuts. I don't know. I can't focus, and I get like off. But I was enjoying just listening to it when I could, and I was like cleaning my house or, you know, just didn't want to use my eyeballs. I would listen to it, and then at other times I would just read some chapters. I don't know, I was liking that. Quite a few of these books towards the end, I kind of started doing that. So I will tell you a little bit about the first book, just to kind of introduce you guys to this storyline if you haven't heard about it. But Renegades basically follows Nova, and she is an anarchist, and they are like the villains of this world. And then the Renegades are the heroes, and they all have superpowers of some kind. And Nova can put people to sleep with her touch. Well, she's tired of being the villains, and she's tired of being oppressed, and she is just like, we are just the same as these other people, but just because they're in power, they have totally pushed us down. And so she infiltrates into the Renegades to try and bring them down. So that's kind of the general premise. You're very much throughout the whole thing questioning whether the villains are really that bad and whether the Renegades are really that good, and some of their motives and stuff just seem a little off. And so it's really like an interesting take, and I really enjoyed the conclusion. There was a couple things that maybe I could have seen coming a little bit, but overall I definitely was not expecting the way it ended. I enjoyed the fact that there's an epilogue that kind of opens it up to maybe more characters being talked about and books being made in this kind of universe. So I'm curious as to if Marissa Meyer will do that in the future. I know at one point, I do have a vlog coming up about this, I think, I don't know, later this week at some point. This book and The Space Between Worlds and Black Sun I read in a vlog, and that will be coming up very soon. It was supposed to go up last week, and I was having a ton of issues with the clips, and I had to like re-download them, and just, it was a nightmare, but it is going up very soon. So I was saying that I was in the middle of some action scenes, and I was just like, kind of like, okay, I want more of the characters and how this action scene is going to affect them and their relationships. And then like 50 pages later, if that, it was just like, boom, here we go. Everything's just getting crazy between all these people. And I was just like, yes, I love it. So my random thoughts on this book, but very much enjoyed this trilogy. So you guys should definitely check it out. Okay, so the next book I'm going to talk about here is Sadie by Courtney Summers, and this one is kind of a mystery thriller type book, but it has this really great podcast element to it, and we are basically following 2 points of view. We're following from Sadie's point of view, and then we're also following the podcast and from Wes McCrae, who's like the person who does the podcast, and his kind of journey as he's trying to find Sadie. Sadie's gone missing, and he's trying to figure out what happened to her. And at first he's like, I mean, girls go missing all the time. But then he finds out that Sadie's younger sister was actually murdered like a year before she goes missing or something like that. And so it just makes things a little bit more mysterious and interesting. And so he has this podcast where he's investigating and trying to find her, and then we're also following Sadie, and we're seeing like kind of where each of their plot lines are kind of intersecting and different stuff. I loved this. I gave it 5 stars. I felt like it felt so real, and I think that's why I really gave it 5 stars. It just felt so real, like this could totally happen. This could definitely be a thing, and oh my gosh, it just, like at the end, just really hit me in the feels, and I just was like, Sadie, what is going on here? Yeah, it just, I felt like these characters could have been totally people. This could have been a real life instance, and I don't think the ending will be for everybody. It was a little bit open, but I feel like it just made it pack more of a punch the way that she ended the story, so I just adored it. 5 stars for sure. So then I also read The Night Swim by Megan Golden, and this is another book with a podcast in it. And in this one, we are following Rachel, and she is the podcast speaker, and she decides to cover a rape trial in her podcast season. So she's in like the 3rd season of her podcast, and usually she does cases that have already kind of been maybe closed or nothing's really been found out about them. And this time she's going to follow a live rape case and be in court and like give the news on it basically on her podcast. And she really wanted to try and give like an objective view of it and each side, because it's super controversial in this town whether this girl is lying or not, and how she's could be ruining this kid's life and yada yada. So it is a very interesting book in that it really takes on that topic and talks about it, and how, you know, when it comes to murder, somebody murders somebody, everybody's like, no, we hate that person, they're awful. But when it comes to rape, sometimes it's hard because it's such a he said, she said kind of thing. There's not always physical evidence, or like, how do you prove that somebody didn't consent? So it gets a little tricky, and then it's just kind of like, who do you believe? So I don't know, it was very interesting the way she did that. We also follow another plot line, and it is about one of the podcast listeners, and she is trying to get in contact with Rachel and talk to her about her sister Jenny, who was murdered in the same town, you know, like a decade ago or so. And so we are also kind of following that. So this one I actually gave 4 stars. I really enjoyed it. I love the podcast element. Both the last 2 books I've talked about with the podcast on audio, ooh, so good on audio. I loved it. But for this one, it was only a 4-star just because I didn't get that feeling of them being as truly real people like I did with Sadie. And towards the end there were some things that definitely felt more book-ish. Like the ending, I was like, okay, this feels like, you know, how you would end a book or a movie with just that really dramatic, twisted, weird ending where things all kind of start colliding and coming together, and that's fine. Like, books do that, and they're there for entertainment, and I get that. It just made it more of a 4-star. It made it to where it just didn't feel as real life, and that, you know, it is what it is, but that's kind of where the rating ended up at a 4 versus a 5. Okay, and the last book that I finished this month was Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. This one is about Francis and Alid and their friendship as they kind of bond over a podcast, Universe City, and they work on it together a little bit, but they also have several other things in common, and they have a lot of discussions about sexuality and growing up and parents and depression, and there's a lot of talk of different things in this book, which I think is awesome. The characters are very developed and that kind of a thing. I only gave this one a 3-star just because I felt like at points it really dragged and meandered, and apparently I didn't like meandering things. This I felt like meandered, and Black Sun I felt like meandered at times, and yeah, so I just felt like it could have been shorter. This is almost 500 pages, and I don't think it needed to be that long. I think that some of it could have been cut down, and then it would have just gotten to the meat of things a little bit better. Like, there was times when it was just like, we're literally just following them to school, and then they're sitting at lunch, and then there's this and that, and I just felt like it just kind of got dull. Like, we were seeing the same thing over and over again because we were just seeing their regular life going through. It needed a little bit more of that dramatic stuff going on that's bookish, you know, a little bit more of that going on. And maybe that's not what the author was going for exactly, but if it was going to be that long, I felt like it needed that, or we could have cut it down and then it could have still had that great representation and the character development and that piece to it without it just being kind of meandering. So those are the rest of the 6 books that I finished in the second half of February here. So 10 books in total. I hope you guys enjoyed, and if you did, you will subscribe and stick around. I think that out of the 6 books that I finished in this last half of the month, Sadie might be my favorite out of all of them. So I'm going to say that if you stuck around, stick something red down below. Red, any emoji down in the comments to say that you made it this far and say hey to me. And I will talk to you guys super soon. Bye!